Hello, everybody, and welcome to MCUny, Kingsborough's first ever and one and only Marvel-based podcast. I'm here with my co-hosts,
Jared Inkster
and
Reymi Reyes.
I'm George Desjardins, here with you to talk about X-Men. So, we here are some pretty big Marvel fans. Jared, why don't you tell us what you think about Marvel? What do you think about the X-Men?
I like the X-Men. I like the X-Men. I was a fan of them growing up. I watched the original show that was on Fox Kids in the morning in the 90s to date myself.
Just about to say. Nice.
But yeah, no, it was, I grew up. I had the comics. I took a long break, and then when I was back in college, originally at NYU, I would pick up when there was a big division, when the Phoenix came back and they did the Phoenix 5, which sounds like a band now. When they did that, I got back into it, and then the teams broke up. Spoiler alert, if you didn't read that story.
Whoa.
And Wolverine took over the school and the kids, and Cyclops took over the team for the most part, like with Havoc and stuff. And there was like a division of ideologies. And then I fell off. There was just a lot of books to collect. But a lot of the stuff that's going on in the movies now or that have gone on, I've either read the original source material or have always wanted them to do something from those stories because I did grow up with them. Yeah.
And Reymi, what about you?
Next question again?
What was it? Like, why are you a fan? How long have you been a fan? What's your background and how much do you like the X-Men?
X-Men, watching Days of Future Past movie. Great movie. Other than that, it's just been like a loose fan. I've been like a loose fan of specifically the X-Men. But now that watching X-Men 97, I'm starting to get more into it. Learning more about, there's a bunch of other characters that haven't been in the movies. So it's growing, to say the least.
Do you have a favorite X-Men so far?
Favorite X-Men character?
Yeah.
So far? I don't think so. I don't want to have any dead air. I don't think so.
All right. Well, for me, I was never too much of an X-Men fan until X-Men 97 started coming out. And now, I kind of love them. As you can see, I've got a couple comics here.
But you were like an MCU fan before that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm pretty much an encyclopedia when it comes to the MCU. Tying it into comics is where I kind of fall short, which is why you're here.
Yeah, my memory of the actual MCU is way weaker than yours.
Yeah.
Mine, I start to remember like the comic book history, and or I want it to be that. So I just I'm gonna blend. It's like when I speak Spanglish, it's like half the sentence is comfortable and the other half is what I needed to say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I feel like there's also kind of a pervasive sense of that throughout the whole fandom right now, is like, which way is this going? Are we going towards comic stuff, or is the MCU trying to be something of its own? But yeah, I mean, the X-Men, super cool. I was always interested in Gambit as a character ever since I was a kid. X-Men 97 really opened my eyes to the whole team. That was really just like my first actual introduction. I mean, I had seen the X-Men movies in the past. Days of Future Past absolutely is my favorite.
Would you say that if it wasn't for the MCU making the shift towards X-Men that you wouldn't have as much of an interest, or would you say that even the Fox content has kept you afloat enough in the interest?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Is that I definitely, if it was still Fox only and it was like the Fox X-Men movies coming out, I don't think, because I didn't watch them when they were coming out, and the only thing that really draws me to something in Marvel is, that's going to show up in the movies soon. I should, know about it. I should learn about where it ties into other things, because luckily they're so good about, adapting comic stories that you can really say like, these two characters met and maybe had like a short 3 or 5 like comic arc together, and now, that might mean they're going to team up together in an episode or two of the show or something.
Right, for sure. I do think there's also been an interest in, like, some people say that it's terrible that some of the directors or like people in the source, like people along the line of production haven't read the source material. And while I feel like you can argue both ways, right? Like source material is important for the original fans and for a foundation of where things should come from and where you should at least understand where they originated from. But also not having that now, like it becomes a filter that you now see things through, right? So like when you go to make your art, you're now seeing them with that filter of like, oh, here's the source material. Spider-Man, you know, like people didn't complain that much when Tobey Maguire had organic webbing, which they readdressed, you know? So there's things where you can make stylistic or, you know, even choices that change the storyline. I mean, everyone has their dose of it. Like, I didn't like the original character in Moon Knight, which I told you about. But, like, that's, you know, but there's other stuff that I love that is original to the MCU that I think was intelligently done. Like you said, like, let's introduce these characters in this way, and they may or may not come back around. And you could judge how much they've been in it, or you could just enjoy it. You know? Yeah,
exactly. And that's kind of one thing that I wanted to get into with all of us, because now finally you have seen at least some of X-Men 97. So what did you think?
I think I was saying earlier, like, I like how each episode, it feels like its own little story, but there is that over arc, like there is that, like that whole series. It's all one thing, but those episodes feel like a little story in itself. Like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that serialized kind of like it's like it brings you back to those 90s cartoons, right? It's like
to be fair, Stan Lee's original idea and the Marvel's like main motif for like mission statement in a way is that every comic could be someone's first comic, right? So the story has to stand alone, and that one issue has to be good. And if it's not good on its own 2 feet, then it doesn't matter where it fits in the storyline because it wasn't good. It was a bad issue. It was a dead week. What's the point of putting in a whole month of production? We'll have artists come down and draw, and someone else come and go over those lines. You know, have an inker, have a penciler, have a storyboarder, editor, writer, and then it'd be bad. It's not like episodes of a TV show where you're creating filler arcs. You don't want that. I mean, there's like Christmas issues and stuff for that. There's anniversary issues and stuff for side stories. There's a ton of other places for that, but your issue to issue thing, in their mentality and Stan Lee's original eyes and Marvel's mission was that each issue should be someone's first. And I think Marvel killed that with X-Men. Bo killed that with the writing for X-Men 97 because, like you said, Reymi, every episode feels like its own thing, but then it also fits into a big picture. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And how did you feel about the show at large?
Oh, it was so good. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know spoilers, but it's going to cool places. If you're a fan, again, this is a perfect example. If you're a fan of the source content, you're happy that you're seeing an original story, but that the source content has been paid thorough attention to the point where you have like forums and people are taking to the internet again and like theorizing which villain is coming, which this is happening, you know, and that's amazing. That's re-sparking the excitement for the OG stuff, you know, the really old 90s stuff, and even before then, 80s, and the whole point of the X-Men, inclusion and creating a bigger community, you know?
And if you want to talk about inclusion and you want to talk about the X-Men, you can talk about how they were excluded from pretty much everything in the main Marvel for like the past 20 years, right? And if you don't know, a little bit of a history lesson here, that is simply because, you know, there could be this long dramatic story about, you know, corporate backstabbing and all that, but it's actually really simple, is that comics were losing popularity in the 90s. Marvel had to sell a bunch of their properties, so they sold Spider-Man and all his stuff to Sony. They sold Fantastic Four and the X-Men to Fox, right? Like some big stuff, but they needed the money. And, you know, theoretically, if you really wanted to look at the big picture, maybe that led them to where they are today, and maybe it was a good thing. But because Marvel and subsequently Disney didn't own the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and that, they, from a business standpoint, didn't want to, well, Ike Perlmutter specifically, not a good guy, wanted to stay away from giving the X-Men any new properties, giving really Fox any new characters to play with in their movies. They didn't want to get bolster the X-Men at all. I'm surprised they didn't really go down the same route as much with the Fantastic Four and with Spider-Man. I don't think they could really afford to kind of push them to the wayside, but then they invented the Inhumans, which were their way of, shunning the X-Men, essentially. Because the Inhumans are pretty much exactly the same. It's, people with hidden unlocked powers that it needs some sort of catalyst to unlock, and they're a team of mutated people, It's the same idea, and it was their way of giving themselves new characters. And then obviously the Inhumans show came out, which at first, if you look at the original video from Comic-Con of them announcing Inhumans, they announced it as a movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
and then it got turned into a
the
show.
Weird ABC series.
Yeah,
with the
exactly.
Low scenic setup.
Yeah.
and
and
background.
No one really watched it, even though it has a bit of a cult following. So that has largely been the reason why we haven't seen much X-Men. But because of comics like this, Trial of Magneto and stuff like that, the X-Men are coming into the fold a little bit more. Disney now owns them. Obviously, Deadpool and Wolverine's coming out at the end of this month, which we'll talk about next week. So there's certainly an effort to bring the X-Men kind of back in.
I think because they're such a huge corporation and obviously part of Disney, that there's definitely a team of marketing and all that stuff going on in the background that actually had this planned out really well, right? Because they never let Wolverine IP fall. They just let him join the new Avengers and put him right there with Spider-Man and Captain America, and kind of made you at least be synonymous in your brain. Like, they had Bendis for years working with Spider-Man and Wolverine on the Avengers, which you've never seen before, on the new Avengers team with Luke Cage, which was mind-blowing, and then he eventually took over. And they had Professor X was part of the Illuminati, so they had like these they had their subliminal ways of remember the X-Men.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. Remember the X-Men. They're going to be back.
We're including them.
Yeah, they're just. But that's also how Wolverine became synonymous with you think X-Men, people think what X-Men do most people think first? Wolverine, because he's the only one they kept afloat for so many years, even though he wasn't an original character. He wasn't an OG member. But yeah, no, they've I think they've purpose. There's I think there's a lot more behind the brain trusty type stuff going on back there that they definitely didn't want people to completely forget. But they were using the IP in just the right way. And now it's the floodgates are open and welcome back X-Men. And they act like. The funny thing is, the thing that's a little annoying is that, sometimes they act like they never went away. And I was just
yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Pride came around? Full-blown X-Men everywhere, right? Not for the last 10 years. What was that? That's so weird to me. I don't know. Welcome back, Mystique's. We're going to retcon Mystique's relationship. Now she was the man that gave birth to Nightcrawler, not the female that gave birth to Nightcrawler. What? It's almost oh, we messed up. Let's overpour and give you more food. No, it just feels that. I'm all about it. I'm all about morph being referred to as a they, them, and being accepted and wanting more inclusive things. But I just feel retconning to overcorrect, overstep and overcorrect just for the sake of doing it, just feels heavy-handed, right? Whereas there's definitely places and stuff that it's super appropriate and this story makes sense. It makes so much sense, But we know that she abandoned Nightcrawler, she held him, that she was the one that threw him off a cliff. To retcon that is just very strange.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that. I think it's very often that, comic characters will get a new type of origin, I feel like Spider-Man's origin has had those little minute
Wolverine's
changes. Son. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wolverine having son, not just her dying.
Yeah, exactly. And various other origins. I mean, Batman Joker, they all have like 10 different ways that they become who they are, right?
Which it's not looking good. But as far as inclusive characters, I love Daken, Duckhead, whatever.
Yeah.
I like the whole Wolverine story that's currently out with getting rid of him. I was like, no.
Yeah.
Like that character was great. I mean, he already got rid of Castle, so I guess it's a little bit of karma, but.
So yeah, I mean, essentially, I think the future is bright. Are you excited for Deadpool and Wolverine? Are you gonna go see that?
Who isn't excited for Deadpool and Wolverine? But what I wanted to say about the X-Men into the MCU, we've seen it with Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness,
That's
with Charles Xavier. In what version of Earth was that?
That's 838.
838. Yeah.
Oh, the Illuminati world or whatever?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Strange.
And then we're seeing it here with Wolverine, like in the MCU, like, and then we have the X-Men 97. So I feel like Marvel is just trying to like not mess it up because they have a lot to like, they don't want a
lot riding on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they mess up, if Kevin Feige is like screws this up, then I just feel like they need this.
Yeah, and
they need this.
Let's not forget. Maybe you guys didn't see the Marvels, but are we going to ignore the post-credit scene because Beast is there, right? And
Oh, yeah.
Monica is in this other world where the X-Men exist, and she's in the X-Mansion, and that's the most recent thing that we've left off on. So people aren't really thinking about it, but because I don't see anyone out there talking about it, but they're really, really teeing up some X-Men stuff right now. And Kevin Feige just put out a quote, and he said that the X-Men in the MCU is really going to kick off after Deadpool and Wolverine comes out. Like, apparently that's going to start everything. And Ryan Reynolds has been dropping some pretty interesting little hints here and there saying like, oh, Hugh is the only guy who could ever play Wolverine and he's the best. So that's got people thinking, and also some people on Twitter have been going out and saying, oh, here's a insider report saying that apparently Hugh Jackman wants to stay on until Secret Wars. So we'll see about that. Last question for both of you. What would you rather see? Would you rather the X-Men in the MCU be introduced? Because I've seen these two kind of ideas be thrown out. Would you rather the X-Men have been introduced in a show, like maybe a one or two seasons of like a 10-episode anthology show that like follows each X-Men as the team is like slowly assembled and we see all of their origins? That, or a movie, or maybe even a trilogy of movies that reestablishes the X-Men. Like,
that hasn't worked so far. It just hasn't worked so far. I feel like this is the right way to do it. Like, Reynolds put an arm behind their back to make Deadpool the first time. He twisted their arm, the other arm, to make it rated R. He then made the second movie fit what actually happens to Deadpool in the comic books, and he gets stuck with Cable sharing a co-title. That's incredible meta stuff. And then this third movie just being like, all right, you know what? We did this. Who's the other Canadian who's like, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be a character anyway? Like, it makes sense. Yeah. It fits too well. It's just puzzle piece. Like, this was the right way to do it. If they want to do a show from here, or movies, or overstep again, go for it.
I feel like movies is the way to go, but there's so many there's so many X-Men characters that you could do like tons of spin-offs on Disney Plus. You could do a couple of like special presentations of like after the movie. Yeah,
you need a spectacle. You need that Infinity War magic. You need that Endgame magic where you have like a ton of strangers sitting in an empty room together going, oh.
Okay,
in a movie theater. Yes. Yeah.
Fair enough. And I'm gonna leave you guys with this. Both of these guys just said they would rather X-Men movies, right? Look at history. How good have the X-Men movies done? Whereas you want to look at history, what just happened with the first ever X-Men show on Disney Plus, right?
But what about
It
the
is
other MCU shows?
The most highly renowned X-Men project, the highest rated Marvel show that they ever released.
But they sold you nostalgia.
I mean, it was nostalgia for a lot of people, but it also introduced a lot of new fans, especially me.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to enjoy it fully, knowing nothing about the X-Men beforehand. Either way, that's for you to decide. Thank you for watching the first episode of the MCUny podcast, Kingsborough's first ever and one and only Marvel-based podcast.
Go watch the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie.